As I reached the milestone of my 72nd birthday, I found myself anticipating the arrival of flowers, or at the very least, a heartfelt card. Instead, my son presented me with a beautifully bound folder, a contract for new housing, as he referred to it, a nursing home. He remarked that I no longer belonged in their way of life. I remained composed. I refrained from screaming. I duly executed my response with the seal of a notary. 3 days later, a letter arrived for him. You have made the decision to forsake your mother. She now relinquishes all, even the enterprise that bears her name. If this tale struck a chord within you, consider subscribing and share in the comments the city or country from which you are tuning in. I find myself genuinely intrigued to discover your location of connection. I am known as Margaret Richardson. At the age of 72, I found myself on the day I received the message. A simple message, devoid of calls or cards, sent on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Join us on Saturday as we gather to honor your birthday here. That was the moment. There is an absence of emoji, a lack of warmth, and no inquiry into my desires. My son, Andrew, managed to condense what would have required a week of planning into fewer than 10 words. After reading it, I lingered at the kitchen table, the phone lying still in my grasp. The waning afternoon light spilled in golden ribbons across the tiles, while the tea in my cup had turned lukewarm. Beyond the window, a neighbor's dog let out a single bark before succumbing to silence once more. The refrigerator emitted a soft, persistent hum that filled the quiet space. All that surrounded me seemed remote and somewhat empty, as though the atmosphere had changed and I was the final one to realize it. In a quaint, meticulously maintained house nestled in northern New Jersey, I found solace in solitude. It may not have been magnificent, yet it belonged to me. Every flower in the garden was planted by my hands. Every squeaky hinge was mended with care, and each photo adorning the walls was chosen with intention. My husband, Thomas, had departed from this world 12 years prior. Since that time, I crafted a serene cadence that offered me companionship more profound than what most individuals ever could. Once a meticulous accountant, I now find myself in retirement, navigating the passage of time with the same care I once reserved for numbers. I had traded spreadsheets for the art of baking, client meetings for the immersive world of audiobooks, and the commuter train for the serenity of long morning walks. Andrew was my sole offspring. I had nurtured him with attention, even meticulousness, not in a suffocating manner, but rather with a constant, unseen support that I wished would ease his journey through life. I financed my education, assisted with his initial business loan, cared for his dog during his travels, and stood by him when his wife, Christina, contemplated leaving her job to reinvent herself. I never sought anything in exchange. I believed that was the essence of a good mother, offering boundless love without the need for tallying. Yet, birthdays have consistently held significance for me, not for the spotlight but for the recognition. A time in the year to reflect and acknowledge, you remain present, you continue to hold significance. In my youth, Thomas would compose lengthy handwritten notes that brought me to tears. Andrew had a knack for selecting small details that held significance. A cherished edition of my favorite novel, a fresh pair of gardening gloves, and even a delightful set of antique measuring spoons that had caught my eye in a shop window. Yet this year, all that came my way was a simple text. The clock caught my eye. Just 3 days remained until Saturday. I reassured myself that it was merely a hectic week. Perhaps the message was conveyed in haste. Perhaps a surprise was in the works. Perhaps I was being overly sensitive. Yet I was aware of the truth. For years, I had sensed the impending change on the horizon. Slipping in quietly, like dust accumulating on a shelf you eventually overlook. Reduced encounters, diminished gaze. Christina's wince at my offer to assist in the kitchen spoke volumes. Andrew's distracted scrolling through his phone while I shared my stories was quite telling. They were not unkind, merely finished, as individuals silently gather the chairs after a performance that has stretched beyond its intended duration. Nevertheless, I replied to the message. I appreciate it and I will be there. I included a smiley face at the end. Perhaps it's a matter of habit, or perhaps it's the flicker of hope that lingers within me. The following day, I retrieved the green silk dress that had been tucked away in the depths of my closet, the one whom Thomas had always cherished in my presence. It had been years since I last donned it, yet it still fit, albeit with a looser drape than I recalled. I carefully polished my shoes and selected a pair of earrings that were understated, avoiding any that might dangle excessively. I took the time to wrap a small gift for my grandson, a beautifully crafted afghan that I have been crocheting for the past month. In deep navy and cream, I stitched quietly, the world continuing its relentless motion around me. Party was the last thing on my mind, to be honest. Yet I clung to a hope, perhaps naively, for something modest. A cake adorned with a handful of candles, accompanied by a heartfelt toast, the melody of my name uttered with warmth. What I received, however, was an invitation presented with the same enthusiasm one might reserve for confirming a dentist appointment. It became evident at this moment that the focus was not on my own narrative. It felt like a duty, merely a tick on a list. The remainder of the week was devoted to nurturing my garden, carefully pruning the hydrangeas and diligently watering the herbs. It occupied my hands while allowing my mind to drift just out of reach. Yet, each time I walked by the kitchen table, my gaze was drawn to the small envelope I had set there, just in case. A card I had purchased for myself weeks ago, as trivial as it may seem. I never intended to utilize it. I was simply drawn to the image on the cover. A vibrant bird, adorned in hues of paint, rests gracefully on a branch, gazing into the distance, embodying freedom and a carefree spirit. Saturday arrived, bringing with it a gentle drizzle that adorned the sidewalks and infused the air with the scent of earth and nostalgia. I adorned myself with care, meticulously wrapped the gift, and lingered before the mirror for a few additional moments. The woman gazing back at me bore gentle creases around her eyes, a silver thread woven through her hair, and hands that had experienced more than most could ever comprehend. She felt prepared, or so she had assured herself. With a cab summoned, I made my way to the porch, umbrella poised in hand. As the vehicle departed from my street, I cast a final glance behind. The flowers danced softly in the breeze, while the porch light, though superfluous in the brightness of day, had sprung to life with a flicker of its own accord. It was my birthday. I reassured myself that this alone was sufficient. I had yet to discover that the true treasure awaiting me was not adorned with a bow. Days later, it would arrive in a sealed envelope, bearing the weight of legality and an unmistakable finality. Yet that evening, as I journeyed toward what ought to have been a joyous occasion, I remained unaware of the depths of loss that awaited me, nor could I foresee the treasures I would ultimately uncover. The cab set me down at their townhouse just shy of 5 o'clock. The rain had diminished to a gentle mist, wrapping itself around the edges of my coat and creating fragile beads on the gift bag resting in my lap. I stepped onto the pavement slowly, preparing myself not for the elements, but for an unnamed force, something akin to resistance or resignation, though I couldn't quite discern which it was. Their house nestled among a series of nearly indistinguishable structures, meticulously maintained, contemporary, and devoid of character, the sort of dwelling crafted to captivate from afar, yet providing scant comfort upon closer inspection. I pressed the bell and stood in anticipation. The sound of music drifted in from within, soft and ambient, meticulously chosen. Voices ebbed and flowed, laughter cascading sporadically into the twilight sky. As the door swung ajar, it revealed not Andrew, but rather one of their companions. A woman unfamiliar to me smiled warmly, uttered my name, and gracefully stepped aside, as though she were ushering in a delivery with a welcoming gesture. Neither embrace nor greeting, only movement. As I stepped into the foyer, a bustling array of coats and umbrellas greeted me, accompanied by the alluring aroma of catered delicacies and the subtle warmth of luxurious candles. Everything appeared immaculate, tables adorned with an array of appetizers, drinks cascading in elegant glasses, and guests attired as though they were attending a networking event rather than a birthday celebration. I paused, caught in a moment of indecision, unsure of my next step, before a figure gracefully maneuvered by, balancing a tray laden with shrimp cocktails. At last, my gaze landed on Andrew from across the room. He engaged in conversation with someone, his hands sweeping wide in a familiar gesture I had witnessed countless times since his childhood. Confident, animated, and just a touch theatrical. I observed him chuckle at something amusing before casting a fleeting glance in my direction. A brief glimmer of recognition passed between them. He resumed the conversation, leaving me uninvited to join. 10 minutes passed before he finally approached me. He offered a fleeting embrace, hasty and unfocused, akin to one completing a task before turning to weightier concerns. He gestured for me to settle in, directing my attention to a chair nestled in the corner of the living room, adjacent to a side table overflowing with empty glasses and crumpled napkins. A chair reserved for moments when all the others were occupied. I settled into my seat, setting the gift bag gently on the floor beside my feet. I clasped my hands in my lap, a smile gracing my lips as I surveyed the faces around me, each one remaining still, untouched by the urge to connect. They engaged in lively discussions about investments, educational institutions, and travel itineraries. Their universe revolved on an alternate axis, while I remained a mere ornament at the periphery of the scene. Christina glided past, gave a slight nod, and bestowed a nebulous compliment on my dress. I expressed my gratitude, yet she had already vanished. She glided from one guest to another, embodying the essence of a refined hostess, effortlessly poised and impeccably graceful. It struck me how frequently her fingers brushed against Andrew's arm, how she leaned in to whisper words into his ear, as if they were bound by the intimacy of unspoken confidences. Within her, there existed neither animosity nor affection. Hope had faded from my heart long ago. The dinner was presented in a buffet style. With a small plate adorned with salad and chicken in hand, I made my way back to my corner. No one had reserved a place for me at the table, and that was perfectly all right. Though I had always leaned towards the role of an observer, it pierced deeper than I cared to acknowledge, watching my son laugh joyfully from across the room while I sat there in solitude, my meal untouched. Then arrived the moment that was destined for me. With a delicate chime, Christina raised her glass, beckoning the attention of all present. The atmosphere hushed as Andrew advanced, a polished navy blue folder cradled in his hands. I straightened my posture, a sense of uncertainty creeping in about what lay ahead. He started to delve into the concept of age, exploring transitions and the way families expand and transform, leading to shifts in roles. He spoke of the significance of foresight, of solace, of ensuring that those dear to us are secure and cared for. The phrases drifted by, ethereal and enchanting, yet hollow at their essence. And then he uttered the words, revealing that they had discovered a splendid haven for me, a charming community complete with medical care, social gatherings, and even an art studio. A new chapter, he referred to it, liberation. He presented the folder to me, and within it lay a contract, meticulously printed and already bearing the signature of the facility administrator. The move-in date stands out in yellow, accompanied by a brochure nestled within, showcasing cheerful gray-haired individuals congregating around puzzles and swimming pools. I glanced at it, then turned my gaze to him. He offered a smile. The room erupted in applause, and a playful remark floated through the air, suggesting I was ascending in the world. I nodded, my lips maintaining a courteous smile that belied my true feelings. I softly shut the folder and placed it delicately on my lap. The stillness I embraced in that instant resonated more profoundly than any words I might have uttered. Yet it seemed that no one took notice. They had already progressed beyond it, to sweet indulgences, to refreshing libations, to the unfolding dialogue ahead. I remained in that chair long into the night, as guests trickled out and the sounds of laughter and conversation gradually diminished. No one inquired about my feelings. No one inquired about my excitement. My perspective was excluded from the festivities. The choice had been finalized. My destiny had been charted out for me. What remained was my acquiescence, unvoiced yet anticipated. As I journeyed home, tears did not fall. I gazed through the window at the shimmering city lights, contemplating how many mothers had experienced the same emotions that stirred within me. The gradual fading, the subtle treachery cloaked in deliberate words, the manner in which your name lingers on their lips, becoming gentler, more estranged, and increasingly remote. I recalled the house I had constructed alongside Thomas, the bank documents I had duly signed. Among the subtle yet potent nuances I had kept unvoiced. They perceived me merely as an elderly woman clad in a green dress, yet I held on to every memory. Upon the dawn following the revelry, I found myself stirring from slumber sooner than my customary hour. The light had not yet fully infiltrated the room, leaving the house enveloped in a tranquil silence that evoked memories of childhood snow days. Yet, in this moment, I felt no softness within. Only a piercing clarity remained, a stillness that descends once a decisive word has been uttered, even if those present were unaware of its finality in that moment. I did not prepare any tea. I refrained from toasting the bread. I strolled barefoot along the hallway, glancing at the photographs of Andrew as a young child, the framed accolades from my accounting days, and the coat hooks that once bore Thomas's old jackets until I finally let them go. As I swung open the hall closet door, my hand reached up to retrieve the key nestled on the top shelf. There it lay, a small key, crafted from brass and utterly unremarkable. Yet I had always kept it close, never allowing it to slip from my grasp. At the rear of my bedroom closet, tucked beneath a meticulously arranged pile of blankets, lay the fireproof box. I transported it to the kitchen table and set it down with care. My hands glided with a determined grace. Years had passed since I last opened it, not due to forgetfulness, but rather a lack of purpose. Until this moment, within lay documents, meticulously organized, encased in plastic sleeves, inscribed with my own handwriting. One by one, I carefully extracted them and arranged them in a neat row. The deed to the cabin upstate lay before him, the very one Andrew had always claimed as his own, despite never having lifted a finger for its maintenance. Amidst the clutter lay the incorporation papers for the LLC we had established at the inception of his first venture, alongside the transfer of ownership documents that, contrary to his beliefs, remained unfiled. There existed the joint savings account I had initiated with my retirement payout, the very one Andrew was convinced had been closed long ago. It had not. He placed his trust in me entirely, and rightfully so. I had never provided him with a justification to doubt me. I had endorsed checks during his times of financial strain, provided collateral when the banks wavered. Yet, with each instance of fulfilling my duties, I meticulously examined the fine print, sought supplementary documentation, and discreetly preserved the originals. Not from distrust, but from habit. Not from naivety, but from experience. Born of the quiet wisdom of a woman who had devoted decades to observing a world that favors the loud while overlooking the patient. He had never inquired about the name that adorned the LLC. I had informed him that we would submit a request for a change after the initial year, once everything had settled down. He failed to follow up. As the business soared to new heights, he naturally believed that the necessary paperwork had been taken care of, yet it remained unaddressed. The ownership stayed firmly rooted in its original place. I settled at the table, poring over each page once more, deliberately and with great care, as though I were gearing up for an examination. Long-buried instincts resurfaced. The calculator, perched at the edge of the counter and cloaked in a layer of dust from neglect, once more found its way into my hands. I meticulously totaled values, rechecked margins, and carefully noted dates. I felt no anger. I found myself devoid of any sadness. What I experienced was exacting. A fresh equilibrium was necessary. As the clock struck noon, I found myself resolute in my decision. I reached out to my lawyer, an old colleague from my professional past, now semi-retired yet as astute as ever. I expressed to him my desires and intentions. Without a word of inquiry, he simply instructed me on the documents to gather and scheduled an appointment for the following morning. That evening, I collected the papers and placed them into a new, sturdy folder. I employed dividers and utilized color-coded tabs. A cover sheet has been printed. I designated it as disentanglement. The following morning, I donned a navy blazer paired with slacks. I slipped on the flat shoes that had long been tucked away beneath my desk, a silent companion for those late nights spent at the office. I gathered my hair into a low bun, securing it with the silver clip that Thomas had once gifted me. As I gazed into the mirror, a familiar yet distant figure emerged, no longer merely an aging woman, but a seasoned professional, a devoted mother, a cunning strategist. In the lawyer's office, I affixed my signature to the required documents. The ownership of the business has been entrusted to a charitable trust, which now carries my name. I have revoked the power of attorney. I have made revisions to my will. The cabin was destined for a women's shelter. The savings accounts are divided between a scholarship fund and a legal aid organization dedicated to assisting senior citizens. All that Andrew believed to be his legacy had taken an unexpected turn. With purpose, within the bounds of the law, and devoid of any theatrics, the process unfolded over the span of 2 hours. As I stepped out of the building, a sense of buoyancy enveloped me, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. The air was infused with the essence of late spring, a blend of fresh mulch, car exhaust, and the sweet scent of lilacs wafting from the planter boxes that lined the sidewalk. I strolled deliberately, allowing it to envelop my breath. I felt no sense of victory. This was not an act of vengeance. It was a means of rectification. Upon returning home that evening, I carefully placed the new documents into the fireproof box. The key found its place once more upon the shelf. The dishes were washed by my hands, each one gleaming as it returned to its rightful place. I meticulously folded a load of laundry. I offered sustenance to the feline that graced my porch, the one I never officially adopted, yet consistently nourished. There I settled on the back steps, a glass of water in hand. As I observed the sky transform before my eyes, I reflected on my son, on the boy he used to be, on the man he has grown into, and on all that he had come to overlook, not from a place of malice, but rather from a desire for comfort. He had confused silence with consent and presence with eternity. Yet now all was recorded, evident, conclusive. I hadn't elevated my tone. I had elevated the stakes. 3 days following the revelry, a courier rapped on Andrew's office door. He signed for the envelope with a distracted air, anticipating contracts or marketing proofs within. It is likely that he overlooked the return address until his gaze fell upon the notary stamp nestled in the upper left corner. At that moment, the envelope rested firmly in his grasp. I envisioned the instant he unveiled it. The stillness that ensued played vividly in my mind. The moment his breath could have faltered upon encountering the name at the pinnacle of the letterhead. Mine, inscribed in its entirety, Margaret Elaine Richardson. I envisioned him skimming through each line at first, then revisiting them with a deliberate pace, striving to unravel the meaning behind the words that were now crafting an entirely new reality. The letter lacked any semblance of emotion. I refrained from reprimanding him, nor did I shed tears over lengthy passages. I never claimed to be hurt, nor did I express any disappointment. The framework of the document reveals its own narrative. The opening page bore a formal declaration of relinquishment. The document articulated in precise legal terms that I had opted to relinquish any future claim to cohabitation with family or the receipt of familial assistance. I documented the precise date and time he presented the contract for the assisted living facility, and I acknowledged my understanding that his offer effectively signified a withdrawal of his role as my caregiver. The second page verified the reorganization of assets. It was declared that I had formally transferred all ownership interests in Richardson and Grant Development, the LLC through which Andrew conducted his construction business, into a private charitable trust bearing my name. I observed that the trust was irrevocable. I observed that no formal transfer of ownership had ever been completed in his name. A copy of the original articles of incorporation and the annual filings is attached for your reference. Each carried my mark. None carried his. A paragraph detailing the transition of trusteeship for the upstate property has been included. The cabin that served as a cherished weekend retreat for him and Christina. The responsibility had been discreetly transferred to the Women's Refuge Network, an organization dedicated to offering transitional housing for older women who found themselves uprooted by familial choices. They embraced it with joy. The board is set to cast their vote in the upcoming quarter, contemplating the transformation of the space into a retreat for survivors. The joint savings account that had once fueled his entrepreneurial dreams was now divided, partly allocated to the trust and partly invested in a fund I established for legal advocacy on behalf of the elderly. The clarity was unmistakable. All was in accordance with the law. All was concluded. The third page held a sense of intimacy, a straightforward paragraph, devoid of sentiment, focused solely on clarity. "You have chosen your path," I recorded. "At last, I have crafted my own." I did not request that he call me. I refrained from providing additional explanation. Silence enveloped the moment, leaving no words to be spoken. I envisioned the astonishment, the incredulity, the gradual dawning realization that this was not a menace. It was hardly a response at all. The end had arrived. His voice was a melody I could already envision, even in silence. Initially silent, then on guard, followed by a surge of anger, and finally enveloped in confusion. And then, if he were truthful, he would admit to his fear. For the first time, I had stripped away the one thing he never imagined I would dare to disturb: my silence. He had always taken for granted that I would be there, that I would continue to give, persist in my presence, and fold myself into the smallest of spaces to accommodate his universe. He believed that since I had once offered him everything, I would never reclaim anything in return. Yet this was not taking hold. This marked the delineation. For years, I had stood as the silent pillar in the structure he created. Unseen yet indispensable. The taxes were settled punctually. The capital was invested with unwavering resolve. All the necessary documents submitted, each detail meticulously attended to. I was the unseen framework supporting his triumph, yet he never acknowledged the base until this moment. As dusk settled in, I found myself perched by my front window, observing the final rays of sunlight slip away, swallowed by the silhouettes of the trees. The hydrangeas in the front yard had started to unfurl, their petals kissed by the first hints of blue. With a steaming cup of tea in hand, I settled into my cherished chair, draping a cozy throw blanket over my legs. The phone lay face down on the table, its screen hidden from view. I failed to verify it. I refrained from anticipating a message. Caught me off guard, for he had finally grasped the truth. I was not relocating to a facility. I was not retreating from existence. I was taking it back. Yet, the documents he had nonchalantly presented to me on my birthday were not the inception of my departure. They ignited the flame that led me back. The days that ensued after the letter were hauntingly silent, as though the universe itself was pausing, waiting with bated breath. Each day unfolded with familiar rhythms. I tended to the garden's thirst in the morning light, strolled to the market midweek, and folded laundry as the news softly played in the background. At first glance, all appeared unchanged. Yet, beneath the calm surface, a change was palpable. It started quietly, akin to the shift in atmospheric tension that precedes a tempest. It all began with a subtle disturbance at the grocery store. As I extended my hand toward a jar of preserves, the sound of two familiar voices drifted from the bakery aisle, belonging to neighbors from down the street. They remained oblivious to my presence, or maybe they were aware and simply opted to continue their dialogue undisturbed. One of them hushed her voice, yet I still discerned the words, "Margaret, business and trust fund." As I rounded the corner, their smiles tightened, and they both became inexplicably engrossed in the bread display. It was in the waiting room of my doctor's office that I next caught the faint echoes of whispers. An individual I somewhat recalled as an acquaintance of Andrew's was conversing with the receptionist. He uttered my surname and remarked on the disintegration of matters. He offered no further details, yet his tone conveyed a mixture of intrigue and incredulity, the kind typically reserved for unexpected family upheavals. It was never straightforward. No one dared to confront me. Silence hung in the air, unspoken inquiries lingering as the footsteps on the stairs stretched into an uncomfortable pause. The smiles had grown more fragile. Silence enveloped the space as I entered, conversations abruptly ceasing. I recognized the signals. Having spent ample time in offices, I had come to understand the subtle yet powerful ripple effect of a scandal, murmured just audibly enough to spread, yet not sufficiently to be identified. Through the void of absence, I discovered more than I ever could in the company of presence. Christina ceased sharing images of the cabin. For days, the company's social media lay dormant, a hushed void in the digital landscape. A mutual friend, known for their customary holiday newsletters, failed to send anything at all that week. An old friend from the PDA days reached out, her voice laced with a gentle concern as she inquired about my well-being amidst the unfolding events. I assured her that I was doing well, in fact, better than well. Words eluded her in the aftermath of that moment. I could sense Andrew was in a frenzy. He found himself unready for the upheaval that lay ahead. He had grown accustomed to control, familiar with the comfort of predictability. I had always retreated when requested, affixed my signature to what was necessary, and appeared when summoned. He found himself at a loss for words as the woman he had discreetly placed in the background advanced, not with a clamor, but with an undeniable sense of resolution. I refrained from gloating. While that may not have been the intention, I certainly paid attention. I focused intently. A palpable change enveloped me, as if the very fabric of the world had altered its gaze upon my being. No longer merely an elderly woman tending to her roses in silence, anticipating the rare Sunday visit. I had transformed into something altogether different in their eyes. A peculiar occurrence, a narrative unfolds. They murmured secrets regarding the enterprise. Soft murmurs surrounded the cabin. They murmured in disbelief about how a woman of her age could have orchestrated such a scheme without arousing any suspicion. While waiting at the post office, I caught snippets of a conversation drifting through the air. Two men engaged in a conversation about intelligent documentation and the perils of underestimating the elderly. They shared a light laugh, though it carried no hint of mockery. It was a complex blend of reverence tinged with a sharp bitterness, an admiration cloaked in an undercurrent of fear. I lingered in the shadows of the line, a quiet observer, until the moment arrived when I approached the window and the clerk summoned me by name. Their laughter fell silent. Upon returning home, I drew open the window, inviting the gentle caress of late spring air inside. I rested a book on my lap, yet the words remained untouched. The wind whispered through the trees, a gentle caress, while the distant hum of passing cars mingled with the melodic chorus of birds, filling the air with a symphony of nature's sounds. The house exuded a serene stillness, yet it was far from desolate. It had never seemed more like it belonged to me. Control was never something I sought. I provided Andrew with the means to construct his own existence, never once requesting to wield the hammer myself. Yet, with my name now absent from his ambitions, the very framework began to transform, and those surrounding him started to comprehend just how integral my contributions had been from the outset. It was captivating how individuals could shift from perceiving you as unseen to recognizing you as a force to be reckoned with, merely by the act of asserting your existence on your own terms. They spoke of me as though I were a mere specter, a legend brought to life, an elder with unwavering resolve, a matriarch steeped in recollection, a subtle power who had simply declared, enough. The specifics eluded them. There was no necessity for them to do so. The word had already circulated. She remained silent. She refrained from pleading. She transformed it all. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows, when a knock echoed through the stillness of the afternoon, beckoning me to the door. I had just completed the task of washing the dishes, my hands now drying on a linen towel, when it arrived, a firm, uneven knock that resonated with a hint of uncertainty. I paused, gazing at the door as though it held secrets waiting to be revealed before I dared to turn the handle. The silence of the house over the past few days had been so profound that the sudden sound seemed to pierce through the stillness, taking on an almost dreamlike quality. I had already discerned the identity. As I turned the knob and pushed the door ajar, there he was, my son, standing before me. He appeared diminished from my recollection, not in stature, but in essence. His suit bore the subtle marks of haste, a few wrinkles marring its otherwise polished appearance, while his tie hung loosely, suggesting a struggle with the day's demands or perhaps a moment of exasperation that had led him to tug at it more than once. There was neither a briefcase nor a smile, no elaborate explanation. Only him. His gaze locked onto mine for a fleeting moment before it faltered, as though the mere sight of me unearthed a truth he was unprepared to confront. I quietly moved aside, granting him entry without uttering a single word. He entered with a measured pace, reminiscent of a soul crossing the threshold of a sacred space, unsure of their place within its hallowed walls. He surveyed the living room, his gaze drifting over cherished items, childhood photographs, the knit blanket draped over the couch's arm, and the ever-present stack of old books that resided near my chair. He remained silent initially, and I chose not to hasten to break the stillness. I had discovered the profound influence of space. He remained seated while I chose to stand. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a depth I hadn't recalled, not in pitch, but in substance, devoid of its customary assurance. He confided in me that matters had become intricate, that he had been unaware of the entire framework, and that he had believed the transfer paperwork had been completed long ago. He employed terms such as misunderstanding and assumption, as though the predicament he now faced was merely a consequence of erroneous documentation rather than a betrayal of trust. He endeavored to articulate his rationale regarding the assisted living facility. He claimed it was intended as a gesture of goodwill, that he believed it would simplify matters, that Christina had discovered the location and he hadn't considered I would object, that he felt it was the appropriate moment. I remained silent. I observed him grapple with his own unease, reshaping words into gentler forms that seemed just a bit out of place. I allowed him to express his thoughts. I allowed him to exhaust his energy. As he came to a halt, an extended silence enveloped us, a silence that elongated, tightened, and seemed poised to unravel if one dared to shift too abruptly. As I entered the kitchen, I filled a glass with water and placed it gently on the table before him. Then I took my seat opposite him. After years of silence, I finally confronted him with the unvarnished truth, unfiltered and raw. I conveyed to him that I had perceived every unspoken word during my birthday night, that I had sensed each glance, every omission, and every choice made in my absence. I expressed to him that I had observed the change, how my presence had gradually transformed into a burden, something to be handled rather than embraced. I expressed to him that I had been generous, yet not blind, patient yet not passive. I reminded him that I had dedicated my life to constructing something meaningful, not merely a home, not just a family, but a life rich with value, contribution, and thoughtfulness. My silence did not equate to insignificance. I had not ceased to matter. He gazed at me as if I were a stranger, not merely his mother or a mere silhouette in his narrative, but as a woman, a complete individual. An apology was not something I sought. I did not seek recognition. My intention was not to inflict punishment or evoke shame in him. I had already attended to all that required my attention. What I desired now was simply this: my voice restored, not the boisterous clamor of conflict, but the unwavering, crystalline tone of authenticity. He paid attention, truly paid attention. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he remained silent, neither interrupting nor deflecting. His visage transformed, mellowed, drooped, and bore the marks of time. He appeared as a boy once more, weary and grappling with a reality that had ceased to yield to his desires. That night, we failed to find a resolution. There were no grand gestures of reconciliation. Yet, as he departed, he enveloped me in a hug that lingered longer than it had in years, both arms wrapped around me. In the quiet of the room, I found myself at the window, observing him as he descended the steps and made his way into the street beyond. He paused briefly before entering the car, and I could sense he had more to express, yet he held back. That was perfectly acceptable, for I had conveyed what I needed, and it was acknowledged, neither challenged nor amended, simply acknowledged. Thus commenced a journey into the realm of the extraordinary, a path paved not by ease, but by a profound sense of truth. Uncertainty loomed over me, leaving me in suspense about what would unfold next. Uncertainty loomed over the possibility of rebuilding or drifting further apart. Yet one truth stood clear in my mind. My silence has come to an end, and I have taken back the most potent gift I ever relinquished: my word. A week had passed since his visit when the envelope appeared, a simple manila envelope, delivered by hand, devoid of postage or any accompanying note. I discovered it nestled between the screen door and the frame, as if it were something quietly concealed. It seemed as though the one who abandoned it was caught in a dilemma, torn between the impulse to extend an offering and the urge to express regret. I carried it indoors, set it down on the kitchen table, and gazed at it for a moment before finally deciding to open it. Within lay a letter, meticulously typed, exuding a formal demeanor. Came from Andrew. He recognized the events that had transpired. He refrained from employing grandiose language or extensive contrition. He articulated his realization that choices had been made in haste, with excessive certainty and insufficient consideration for my perspective. He confessed to having made assumptions, to believing that silence signified agreement, to linking age with acquiescence. It was a hushed, deliberate revelation, not born of remorse, but of awakening. Then arrived the second page. It was merely a proposal, lacking the weight of a legal document, devoid of any transfer of assets or a formal plea to reclaim what had slipped through his fingers. It was an experience unlike any other, a personal accord, a pact of intent, if not of legal binding. He extended his respect through the written word. He expressed his realization of having crossed a line, acknowledging that his actions, cloaked in the guise of concern, were driven by convenience. He yearned for a fresh start, one not burdened by ownership or duty, but rooted in the art of listening. He sought nothing from me, no reversal, no forgiveness, no reinstatement of what I had lawfully taken away. He merely sought the opportunity to create something more profound, something that resonated with humanity. He uttered phrases that had long been absent from our conversations: reciprocal, fairness, selection. At the foot of the page, he had inscribed a solitary line. If you are open to it, I would like to begin anew, not with hopes, but with honesty. I gently folded the pages, applying pressure to the crease with my thumb. I reflected on the peculiar nature of witnessing my son engage with me as an equal, as if he no longer held the belief that age or achievement granted him superiority simply due to his speed or financial success. The following morning, I responded, devoid of embellishments or sentiment, purely focused on clarity. I informed him that I had no plans to relinquish the legal control I had meticulously restructured. That chapter of my life had transformed, and I found myself no longer retracing my steps. Yet, I expressed my willingness for dialogue, for a meal, for a semblance of connection. Had it stemmed from respect rather than obligation, I would have incorporated my own interpretation of a contract. Only a solitary sentence, devoid of signatures or dates. I shall gather with you in the realm of respect, not in the shadows of mere tolerance. The envelope sat on the porch, marked with his name, waiting patiently for its recipient. That afternoon it had vanished. In the weeks that followed, subtle gestures began to replace the grand displays of affection. A handwritten card from my granddaughter, a box of loose-leaf tea I had casually mentioned enjoying, and a photograph of Andrew's family, thoughtfully sent through the mail rather than merely shared online. Every element was subtle yet purposeful. On a quiet Sunday, he reached out simply to inquire about the state of my garden. He made no reference to finances. He refrained from inquiring about the trust. He merely inquired whether I had sown the tulips I had ordered the previous autumn. I informed him that the blossoms had yet to unfurl, though the leaves stood robust and unwavering. He remarked that it was a favorable indication. The call spanned less than 10 minutes, yet its impact lingered far beyond the fleeting moments of our usual exchanges. It was not the words he had spoken. It was in the way he articulated it, deliberate, inquisitive, balanced. I was not naive. I never anticipated a change to occur in the blink of an eye. I understood the profound ways in which habits etch their marks upon individuals, the lengthy process required to dismantle ingrained beliefs, particularly those masquerading as affection. Yet a change had occurred. I had etched a boundary, not to separate us, but to clarify my position. To my astonishment, rather than withdrawing, he stepped forward, not to assert dominance, but to occupy a space of mutual understanding. We required no lawyers for this. Only honesty was necessary, the sort of agreement not inscribed on paper, but rather in our presence, in our words, and in the way we ultimately learned to listen to someone we once believed we fully understood. Such an agreement, once established, transcends the need for signatures. It merely calls for recollection. The cadence of my days shifted, albeit without any grand alterations. The atmosphere around me underwent a subtle transformation, devoid of abrupt changes or grand epiphanies. It simply began to feel more personal, more intentional. It felt as though I had finally crossed the threshold into the very essence of the home I had inhabited for decades, no longer a mere guest in my own existence, but rather the master builder of my own narrative. I awoke once more at dawn, lifting the familiar creaky window in the kitchen to invite the fresh morning air inside. I continued to tend to the garden, crafting grocery lists on the familiar notepad adorned with faded daffodils. Yet, there was a newfound stillness in my movements, not one of restraint, but rather one of profound clarity. Each minor decision resonated as a quiet proclamation. This life is my own, these hours belong to me, and these thoughts are uniquely mine. I ceased to justify my choices, neither when I turned down invitations that held no appeal, nor when I opted to immerse myself in a book for an entire afternoon rather than engage with others, nor when I decided to repot my orchids on a Tuesday simply because the whim struck me. Once, I might have felt the need to apologize for merely existing in a space. I have now taken possession of it. I revisited the passions of my past, unburdened by the question of their practicality. I resumed my journey into painting, not with landscapes or still lives, but with vibrant colors, dynamic movement, and the essence of memory. I created chaotic pieces that others might shy away from displaying, yet they held a special place in my heart. They mirrored my emotions, a sense of incompleteness that held a certain beauty. I signed up for a newsletter from a travel company that focuses on intimate, leisurely tours through serene towns. Though I had yet to secure any reservations, the mere act of searching, of envisioning, of recalling that the world remained open to me was sufficient for the moment. At times, I found myself perched on the back porch, cradling a cup of mint tea, as the sun wove its golden threads through the branches of the trees. With my eyes shut, I would immerse myself in the gentle rustle of leaves dancing in the breeze, recalling the girl I once was, the one who lost herself in books, who sought answers to countless questions, who envisioned the essence of life when she would finally hold the reins of her own destiny. All was for her, and as I encountered her once more, it was with a gentle, deliberate grace. Andrew continued to call, not frequently but consistently, occasionally sharing a photo of the kids, other times seeking my opinion on a news item. He never mentioned the business again. He never inquired about the trust. It felt as though we had silently come to a consensus to keep that space sealed, not from a desire to evade, but because the essential truths had already been conveyed through our actions. One day, he inquired whether he and the children could visit to plant something in the garden. It was merely a modest tree, he remarked. I agreed, not out of necessity for the tree, but out of an understanding of its significance. Neither restitution nor penance, merely a gesture, a readiness to enrich my world without overshadowing it. As they arrived, I observed from the porch, his daughter with her hands immersed in the earth, giggling at the chill in the air, his son scrutinizing each worm with the curiosity of a scientist, and Andrew digging with a level of attentiveness I hadn't witnessed in years. I refrained from intervening. I offered no guidance. I settled down with my tea, allowing the scene to unfold before me. Once they departed, I made my way to the spot where the new tree stood, diminutive, verdant, and resolute. I extended my hand and softly placed my palm against the trunk. It remained tender, still discovering its power, yet firmly anchored, sown with purpose, allowed to flourish in its own way. I had transformed into a woman anchored not by the weight of obligation or the identities imposed by others, but by the essence of her own being, in the life she had crafted and reconstructed, in the strength she had ultimately quietly embraced. My home was more modest than those my friends had chosen to simplify their lives in. The frequency of my phone's ringing diminished. My calendar was filled with more empty spaces than scheduled appointments, yet everything within those voids belonged to me. My decision, my pace, my moment. For countless years, I adhered to regulations that were not of my own making. I had consumed the thoughts of others, postponed my aspirations, and diminished my own presence so that those around me could feel more significant. I received accolades for it, deemed elegant, altruistic, and reliable, and perhaps I had been, Yet now I sought to be free from the shackles of those definitions. In that moment, I found my identity shaped by my affirmations and refusals, by the silence that accompanied my choices. I had no desire to recapture my youth. I had no desire to retreat. This was all I desired, the present entirely my own. For the first time, I was truly living life on my own terms, having earned every moment of it. No signatures needed, no permissions sought, just me.